There are only a few snipers over there. Go get 'em. That's what Lieutenant Colonel Woodham told his Marines on the morning of May 18, 1968. Companies K and L moved forward to clear out what their commander believed were just a handful of enemy soldiers hiding in the hamlet of Labac, Vietnam. Within minutes, the few snipers erupted into an exceedingly heavy volume of automatic weapons fire. Marines were pinned down, isolated, unable to move. The air filled with the crack of AK-47s, the thump of mortars, and the screams of wounded men, calling for corpsmen who couldn't reach them. By the end of that day, 28 Marines were dead. Company I had been virtually wiped out. 20 men killed, dozens more wounded. The few snipers turned out to be battalions from one of North Vietnam's most elite units, the 36th Regiment of the legendary 308th Division. This was Go Noi Island, and for 3.5 months in 1968, it would become one of the most savage killing grounds of the entire Vietnam War. 172 Americans would die here. More than 1,100 would be wounded. Some of them had been truck drivers and cooks just weeks before, hastily converted into infantry and thrown into combat against seasoned North Vietnamese regulars. Most Americans have never heard of Operation Allen Brook. There are no Hollywood movies about it, no famous photographs, no memorials. But for the young Marines who fought and died in the hedgerows and rice paddies of Go Noi Island in the summer of 1968, it was as real and as brutal as any battle in American history. This is their story. Go Noi Island wasn't really an island at all. Located 15 miles south of Da Nang in Quang Nam Province, this 2-square-mile patch of farmland was surrounded by rivers and roads. The Song Thu Bon River to the north, the Kai Lam River to the south, and a railroad berm that cut through the middle like a scar. The Americans called it an island, but it was really just isolated, enemy-controlled territory in the heart of hostile country. The Marines had a nickname for the area just north of Go Noi Island, Dodge City. They called it that because every time you went there, you were guaranteed a gunfight. Ambushes, firefights, snipers. Dodge City had it all. And if Dodge City was dangerous, Go Noi Island was a death trap. The terrain seemed ordinary enough. Flat rice paddies, small villages, bamboo groves, thick hedgerows separating the fields. But this simplicity was deceiving. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army had spent years turning Go Noi Island into a fortress. The small hamlets scattered across the island were connected by thick hedgerows and concealed paths that provided perfect cover for ambushes. Beneath the ground, an intricate network of tunnels, bunkers, and fighting positions allowed enemy soldiers to appear, attack, and disappear like ghosts. The bamboo groves offered excellent concealment. The hedgerows channeled advancing forces into predetermined kill zones. Every trail could be booby-trapped. Every tree line could hide a machine gun nest. Every hamlet could contain enemy soldiers ready to fight to the death. For years, Go Noi Island had served as a crucial staging area for communist forces preparing to attack Da Nang. It was the headquarters for the Viet Cong's Group 44, which controlled operations throughout Quang Nam Province. The R-20 and V-25 Viet Cong battalions operated from the island, along with the T-3 Sapper Battalion, elite commando units trained in infiltration and demolition. Intelligence believed that elements of the PAVN 2nd Division were also using the island as a base. No American or South Vietnamese force had entered the western end of Go Noi Island in almost a year. The enemy owned this ground completely. They knew every trail, every hiding spot, every vantage point. They had prepared their defenses carefully, stockpiling ammunition and supplies, building fortifications, laying mines and booby traps. The Marines were about to walk into a nightmare. By late April 1968, American intelligence had detected something alarming. Just 2 months earlier, during the Tet Offensive, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong had launched simultaneous attacks on cities and bases throughout South Vietnam. Though the offensive had been a tactical failure, the Communists suffered devastating casualties. It had shocked the American public and changed the political landscape of the war. Now, in the spring of 1968, the enemy was preparing to strike again. Through reconnaissance teams and limited combat engagements, Marine intelligence determined that the North Vietnamese had moved the equivalent of an entire NVA division into the area south of Da Nang. Reconnaissance Stingray teams reported sightings of large enemy troop movements, groups of 60 to 80 North Vietnamese soldiers moving through the jungle with full combat gear. The communists were staging for what would become known as the May Offensive, or Mini-Tet, another coordinated series of attacks designed to put pressure on American forces and shake public support for the war back home. Da Nang was one of the most important American installations in South Vietnam. The sprawling base complex housed thousands of troops, massive supply depots, and critical air operations. If the North Vietnamese could mass forces on Go Noi Island undetected and unopposed, they could launch devastating attacks on Da Nang itself, rocketing the airfield, hitting supply convoys, and creating chaos in the city. Major General Don Robertson, the commanding general of the 1st Marine Division, wasn't going to let that happen. Up until now, the defense of Da Nang had been reactive. Marines heavily patrolled a rocket belt that extended in a semicircle around the city, trying to intercept enemy rocket teams before they could fire on the base. But Robertson had fresh troops available. The 27th Marines had recently arrived in country, and he decided on a more aggressive strategy. Instead of waiting for the enemy to attack, the Marines would take the fight to him. They would conduct deep-reaching, mobile operations that would disrupt enemy preparations and keep NVA forces away from Da Nang entirely. The enemy wouldn't be allowed to stage unmolested on Go Noi Island. The Marines would cross onto the island, find the North Vietnamese, and destroy them. On May 4, 1968, Operation Allen Brook began. Colonel Reverdy Hall, commander of the 7th Marines, had overall control of the operation. The first unit committed was his 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, 2-7 in Marine Corps shorthand. On the morning of May 4th, 2 companies from 2-7 Marines, supported by M48 tanks, crossed Liberty Bridge onto the western edge of Go Noi Island. They began advancing eastward toward the railway berm that bisected the area, moving carefully through the rice paddies and hedgerows, searching hamlets for enemy soldiers and weapons. For the first few days, resistance was surprisingly light, a few snipers here and there, brief exchanges of fire, but nothing major. By May 7th, Company A from 1st Battalion, 7th Marines had relieved one of the companies from 2-7, and Company K from 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines was added to the operation. The Marines were expanding their footprint on the island, probing deeper into enemy territory. But something felt wrong. The veterans knew it. Where was the enemy? Where were the fortifications intelligence had reported? Where were the battalions of North Vietnamese soldiers that reconnaissance teams had spotted? The answer came on the evening of May 9th. Marines from 2-7 encountered heavy resistance at the hamlet of Xuan Dai. What had been a cautious patrol suddenly exploded into a savage close-quarters battle. The North Vietnamese were dug into fortified positions, and they fought with a discipline and ferocity that shocked even veteran Marines. Machine gun fire raked the Marine positions. Mortars began falling. The enemy wouldn't budge. Airstrikes were called in. F-4 Phantoms screamed overhead, dropping bombs and napalm on the hamlet. Artillery pounded enemy positions. And finally, the Marines overran the hamlet in brutal house-to-house fighting. When the smoke cleared, 80 North Vietnamese soldiers lay dead. But the Marines had paid a price too. Casualties were mounting. The enemy had revealed himself, and now the Marines understood what they were really facing. Intelligence would soon determine that the enemy force was the 36th Regiment of the 308th Division, one of the most famous units in the entire North Vietnamese Army. The 308th Division was legendary. It was one of the original steel and iron divisions that had defeated the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, ending French colonial rule in Indochina. The division had a history stretching back to the earliest days of the Viet Minh, and its soldiers were among the best trained and most experienced in the communist forces. The 36th Regiment had only recently arrived in South Vietnam, having departed North Vietnam in February 1968. They had marched south with orders to assault Allied positions north of the Thu Bon River as part of the May Offensive. Their mission was to hit Da Nang hard and create chaos behind American lines. But the Marines had stumbled into their staging area before they were ready. And now, instead of attacking Da Nang, the 36th Regiment found itself in a fight for survival on Go Noi Island. They weren't going to leave quietly. By mid-May, Colonel Hall realized he needed to disrupt enemy plans more aggressively. Intelligence indicated that the North Vietnamese were continuing to bring forces onto Go Noi Island, preparing for their offensive. Hall came up with a bold plan. He would use deception to catch the enemy off guard. On May 15th, Marine companies began a very visible withdrawal from Go Noi Island. They swept toward Liberty Bridge in an obvious manner, making sure that any enemy observers would see them leaving. The Marines crossed the bridge, received hot food and supplies, and established defensive perimeters on the north side of the river. As rain began to fall, the exhausted troops settled in for the night, but it was all a ruse. Just after midnight on May 16th, the Marines quietly crossed back onto Go Noi Island under cover of darkness. Moving in single file to minimize noise, they traveled 2,500 meters northeast, roughly parallel to the Song Thu Bon River. The column moved through the darkness with weapons ready, every man alert for the slightest sound or movement. At dawn, they stopped and rested in place, hidden in the vegetation. The trap was set. The Marines were deep in enemy territory, and the North Vietnamese had no idea they were there. At 9 a.m. on May 16th, the 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines ran straight into an entire North Vietnamese battalion at the hamlet of Phu Dong. The enemy was completely surprised. North Vietnamese soldiers scrambled for weapons and positions as Marine fire tore into them. But these were elite troops, and they recovered quickly. Within minutes, a massive firefight erupted. The battle raged all day. The Marines tried to outflank the enemy positions but couldn't gain an advantage. The North Vietnamese held their ground with disciplined, accurate fire. Every time a Marine fire team tried to move forward, they were met with a wall of AK-47 and machine gun fire. The NVA had turned Phu Dong into a fortress, and they weren't giving it up without a fight. Colonel Hall called in everything he had. Artillery batteries fired mission after mission, shells screaming overhead to explode in and around the hamlet. F-4 Phantoms made strafing runs, their 20mm cannons chewing up enemy positions. Attack helicopters swept in with rockets and miniguns. The battle continued through the afternoon and into the evening, the sound of explosions and gunfire echoing across the island. Marine casualties mounted. Men were hit by sniper fire, cut down by machine guns, or wounded by fragments from enemy mortars. Corpsmen moved through the chaos, treating the wounded under fire, dragging Marines to safety while bullets cracked overhead. Finally, as darkness fell, the North Vietnamese abandoned their positions and withdrew. They left behind more than 130 dead comrades. The Marines had lost 25 killed and 38 wounded. When the Marines searched Phu Dong, they discovered why the enemy had fought so hard. The hamlet had been a regimental headquarters. Inside the ruins of buildings, they found vast quantities of supplies, ammunition, medical equipment, food, documents, maps showing planned attack routes toward Da Nang, personnel rosters, communications equipment. Colonel Hall's deception had worked. The 36th Regiment's command structure had been disrupted, and their carefully prepared offensive was in disarray. But the price had been terrible, and the fighting was far from over. The casualties from the battle at Phu Dong were still being evacuated when control of Operation Allen Brook passed to a new unit. The 3rd Battalion, 27th Marines, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Woodham. The 327 Marines were different from most infantry battalions in Vietnam. When the battalion was hurriedly assembled at Camp Pendleton earlier that year, the Marine Corps had faced a critical shortage of infantry troops. So they went into the barracks at Camp Margarita and pulled Marines from all kinds of non-infantry specialties: truck drivers, mechanics, cooks, supply clerks, administrative personnel. These Marines were given basic infantry refresher training and told they were now riflemen. It was a testament to the Marine Corps philosophy that every Marine is a rifleman, first and foremost. Every Marine goes through infantry training at boot camp, regardless of their eventual job specialty. But there's a huge difference between remembering basic infantry tactics from boot camp and being a combat-experienced infantryman. Many of the Marines in 3/27 had joined the Corps to work on trucks or in kitchens, not to patrol through hostile jungle carrying a rifle. Now they were being thrown into one of the most dangerous operations of the war. On May 17th, 37 Marines arrived on Go Noi Island and took over from the battered units that had been fighting there for nearly 2 weeks. The morning of May 18th started quietly. The heat was already oppressive, temperatures soaring past 100 degrees, the humidity making it feel even hotter. At 9:30 a.m., Lieutenant Colonel Woodham began expanding his perimeter around the hamlet of Lanam when Company the 1st and Company K started taking sniper fire from Labac, about 300 meters to the north. Woodham immediately made a decision. He ordered Companies K and L to move north and clear out the snipers. He told his Marines, "There are only a few snipers over there. Go get them." The Marines moved out, advancing through the rice paddies toward Labac. They moved carefully, weapons ready, scanning the tree lines and hedgerows for movement. Then all hell broke loose. The few snipers turned out to be a formidable North Vietnamese force, elements of both the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 36th Regiment, and they had been waiting in prepared positions, ready to ambush the Marines. Suddenly, an exceedingly heavy volume of fire erupted from multiple positions. A K-47s, machine guns, and mortars opened up simultaneously. The lead elements of Companies K and L were caught in a kill zone, a carefully prepared ambush site where the enemy had interlocking fields of fire. Marines hit the ground, taking cover behind rice paddy dikes, in ditches, anywhere they could find protection from the incoming fire. But there was nowhere to go. Moving forward meant running into more enemy fire. Moving back meant exposing yourself to the shooters. Staying put meant slowly getting picked off by enemy marksmen who knew the terrain intimately. Companies K and L were pinned down, isolated from each other and from the rest of the battalion. Marines were scattered across several hundred meters of open rice paddies, taking fire from multiple directions. Some were wounded and couldn't move. Others tried to reach wounded comrades but were driven back by enemy fire. Lieutenant Colonel Woodham immediately called for artillery and air support. Within minutes, artillery shells began screaming overhead, exploding near enemy positions. But the Marines were so close to the North Vietnamese, sometimes just meters apart, separated only by a hedgerow or a rice paddy dike, that supporting fire was extremely limited. Fire the artillery too close, and you risked hitting your own men. Pull it back too far, and it was ineffective against the enemy. The same problem hampered close air support. Pilots couldn't tell where the Marines were and where the enemy was. Everyone was mixed together in the chaos of close-quarters combat. Some Marines could hear Vietnamese voices shouting commands just meters away. They could see muzzle flashes from enemy rifles through gaps in the vegetation. They were fighting at arm's length against an enemy they could barely see. Company I was hit the hardest. Caught in the open with limited cover, the company was systematically torn apart by North Vietnamese fire. Marines fell wounded, calling for corpsmen who risked their lives crawling through the fire to reach them. Corpsmen used their bodies to shield wounded Marines while they worked frantically to stop bleeding and stabilize injuries. The battle raged for hours. The sun beat down mercilessly on Marines lying in exposed positions, and the combination of heat, stress, and fear was overwhelming. Some Marines died from wounds. Others succumbed to heat stroke and dehydration while pinned down under fire. By the time the North Vietnamese finally withdrew that evening, the toll was devastating. Company I had been virtually wiped out. 20 Marines killed, dozens more wounded. Company K suffered heavy casualties as well. In total, 28 Marines from 327 were killed on May 18th, with 68 wounded. For many of these young men, truck drivers and cooks just weeks earlier, it had been their first real combat. Lieutenant Colonel Woodham's assurance of only a few snipers would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. That night, as the exhausted and traumatized survivors of Company I tried to rest, Company M was alerted that they would fly into the combat zone the next morning to replace them. The 327 Command Group established a position in a rice paddy south of Lanam, while the remnants of Companies Terroir in K held Lanam itself and Company L moved east. The battle for Go Noi Island had become a meat grinder, and it was nowhere close to being over. Through late May and into June, Operation Allen Brook continued as a grinding, exhausting campaign of patrols, ambushes, and sudden firefights. Additional Marine battalions rotated onto the island. On May 26th, the 1st Battalion, 26 Marines reinforced the operation. On May 28th, the battered 3rd Battalion, 27th Marines was finally relieved and sent to the rear to rest and receive replacements. But no matter how many Marines were committed to the operation, the pattern remained the same. The North Vietnamese avoided large-scale battles, instead conducting hit-and-run attacks that steadily bled American forces. They knew the terrain intimately and could attack or withdraw at will. For every hamlet the Marines cleared, the enemy would simply move to another area and wait for another opportunity to ambush a patrol. On June 5th, Marine battalions moving west along the island were ambushed by PAM forces at the hamlet of Cu Ban. Once again, the proximity of enemy forces made supporting fire largely ineffective, and another confused, close-quarters battle raged throughout the day. Only when Me-48 tanks arrived and began blasting enemy positions with their 90mm guns were the Marines able to overrun the North Vietnamese bunkers. 7 Marines were killed and 55 wounded. 30 North Vietnamese soldiers were found dead in and around their fighting positions. The heat was relentless. Temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity was suffocating. Marines carried heavy loads of ammunition, weapons, water, and equipment through the sticky mud of rice paddies and the thick vegetation of hedgerows. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke claimed almost as many casualties as enemy fire. Men collapsed from dehydration. Others suffered from tropical diseases, infections from minor wounds that wouldn't heal in the filthy conditions, and injuries from booby traps and punji stakes. By early June, American commanders had reached a stark conclusion. The terrain of Go Noi Island itself was the enemy's greatest advantage. As long as the hedgerows, bamboo groves, tree lines, and concealed paths existed, the North Vietnamese would be able to use them for ambushes and attacks. The island's defensive network was simply too strong. There was only one solution: destroy the island itself. On June 6th, the nature of Operation Allen Brook changed completely. The 1st Battalion, 26th Marines was withdrawn, and elements of the 1st Engineer Battalion arrived with heavy equipment: bulldozers, tractors, and roam plows designed for land clearing. The new mission was unprecedented in its scope: the systematic destruction of everything on Go Noi Island that could provide cover or concealment to the enemy. The orders called for total destruction of natural assembly areas, concealing foliage, tree lines, bamboo groves, hedgerows, trench lines, fighting holes, caves, bunkers, tunnels, building structures, anything that could be used by enemy forces. Materials that could be used to build fortifications, concrete blocks, beams, posts, pillars, tree trunks, would be destroyed by crushing or burning. Lieutenant Colonel Albert W. Keller, one of the battalion commanders involved in the operation, summed it up bluntly: "We were to level that island." And that's exactly what they did. Marine infantry battalions provided security while engineers moved methodically across Go Noi Island with bulldozers and tractors. The Provisional Land Clearing Company, equipped with Marine IMCO M64 tractors and Army D7E bulldozers, began scraping the island clean. Everything in their path was destroyed. Trees were uprooted, hedgerows were torn down, buildings were demolished, tunnels were collapsed. The work was dangerous. The engineers constantly hit mines and booby traps. 2 tractors were disabled by landmines on the first day of operations. But the work continued. Day after day, week after week, the bulldozers moved across the island, destroying 97 tunnels, over 2,000 bunkers and fighting positions, and 3.2 kilometers of trenches. In total, more than 8,000 acres, about 12.5 square miles, were completely flattened. What had once been a patchwork of villages, rice paddies, and thick vegetation became a barren, cratered wasteland. On July 18th and 21st, the destruction intensified even further. Aircraft sprayed the island with herbicides, Agent Orange, and other powerful defoliants, ensuring that nothing would grow back quickly. The communist forces, watching their sanctuary being systematically erased, fired on the spray aircraft, but the missions continued. While the land-clearing operations proceeded, the Marines continued to encounter enemy resistance. North Vietnamese forces avoided major engagements, but harassed the Americans with sniper fire, small ambushes, and mortar attacks. On the night of June 14th, a PAVN force attacked Company B, 1st Battalion, 27th Marines in their defensive position. The attack was beaten back with 21 North Vietnamese killed and no Marine casualties. On June 19th, Companies B and D from 1st Battalion, 1st Marines were ambushed at Bac Dong Ban hamlet, and a 9-hour battle erupted before the Marines could overrun enemy bunkers. The Communists were still there, still fighting, but slowly, inexorably, their fortress was being destroyed around them. On July 23rd, Battalion Landing Team 27 launched Operation Swift Play, a complementary operation targeting the Dutha Mountains just 6 kilometers south of Go Noi Island. This was designed to catch enemy forces that might be staging in the mountains, preventing them from reinforcing the defenders on the island. On July 31st, BLT-27 arrived on Go Noi Island itself and relieved the 3rd Battalion, 27th Marines. By August, Go Noi Island was unrecognizable. What had once been a verdant patchwork of hamlets, rice paddies, and thick vegetation was now a barren moonscape of craters and scorched earth. The defensive network that had made the island so valuable to the North Vietnamese had been systematically obliterated. Enemy activity had dwindled to minimal levels. Occasional sniper fire, sporadic mortar rounds, but true to form, the PAVN and Viet Cong continued to resist until the very end. As Marines and engineers made their final withdrawal across Liberty Bridge on August 24th, they were still being harassed by sniper fire from the few remaining enemy soldiers clinging to the ruins of their former stronghold. On August 24, 1968, Operation Allen Brook officially concluded after 3.5 months of continuous operations. The final casualty figures told a grim story. The United States had lost 172 men killed in action, 170 Marines and 2 Navy corpsmen who had died trying to save their wounded comrades. Another 1,124 Americans had been wounded, many seriously. But those numbers didn't capture the full cost. Additional Marines fell victim to heat exhaustion, tropical diseases, snake bites, accidents, and the countless other hazards of combat in Vietnam's brutal environment. The Communists had suffered 917 killed, 11 captured, and 2 who had rallied to the South Vietnamese government. Their infrastructure on Go Noi Island had been destroyed, and their plans for a major offensive against Da Nang had been disrupted. But the victory was hollow. Within months, intelligence reports indicated that Communist forces were already attempting to reoccupy Go Noi Island. The Marines would return to fight there again during Operation Pipestone Canyon in 1969. The cycle of destruction and occupation would continue until the Americans finally left Vietnam years later. Operation Allen Brook achieved its immediate tactical objectives. The North Vietnamese 36th Regiment's planned attack on Da Nang never happened. The May offensive in the Da Nang area was reduced to sporadic rocket attacks rather than a full-scale ground assault. For those few months in 1968, Go Noi Island was denied to the enemy as a staging area, but the strategic value of that achievement remains debatable. Thousands of Americans were killed or wounded for temporary control of 2 square miles of Vietnamese farmland. The enemy would return, the war would continue, and in the end, none of it mattered. Corporal Neil Gettle, the 18-year-old helicopter's support group member who survived the crash of his Chinook and watched everyone else in his unit die on the first day of Operation Allen Brook, returned home to Philadelphia on Christmas Day 1968. He was met at the airport by hundreds of anti-war protesters who screamed at the returning troops and called them baby killers. But Operation Allen Brook remains one of the forgotten battles of the Vietnam War. It doesn't have the name recognition of Khe Sanh or the Ia Drang Valley. There are no major films about it, few books devoted to it, and only scattered mentions in official histories. Yet for 3.5 months in the summer of 1968, Go Noi Island was as brutal a battlefield as any in the war. 172 Americans died there. More than 1,100 were wounded. Thousands more were scarred by the experience in ways that would last the rest of their lives. Their sacrifice deserves to be remembered. Their story deserves to be told. This was Operation Allen Brook, and it should not be forgotten. 1. Operation Allen Brook, the island that devoured Marines, conquer, Vietnam War, 1968-2. Only a few snipers. The deadliest lie in Vietnam. Operation Allen Brook 3, the forgotten battle that killed 172 Marines. Operation Allen Brook, 1968. There are only a few snipers over there. Go get 'em. Those words sent Marines in one of Vietnam's deadliest traps. Operation Allen Brook, May to August 1968, saw U.S. Marines battle elite North Vietnamese forces on Go Noi Island near Da Nang. 172 Americans died, 1,124 were wounded, many of them truck drivers and cooks hastily converted to infantry. This is the forgotten story of the island that became a killing ground.